By the way, the informal logic material he's talking about here, this is typically not propositional logic, because propositional logic is actually the beginnings of formal logic. So, typically not propositional logic, because propositional logic is actually the beginnings of formal logic. So,
Slow down there, Watson. Why are you disagreeing with something I never said? Please answer this for me. Where did I just come out and say this was propositional logic? You already accused me of citing the basics of informal logic stuff when I was describing the characteristics of a logical fallacy. You've already accused me of incorrectly defining the method of validity when I was describing the characteristics of a logical fallacy. And now you're accusing me of trying to label something as propositional logic, when, guess what? I was describing the characteristics of a logical fallacy. Because as far as what we were originally talking about, it was the characteristics of a logical fallacy. Just because you and Pete are obsessed with me and propositional logic doesn't mean you get to point to just any random comment I've made and say, this is not propositional logic, as if I said it was somewhere. You don't even take the time to point out, here is something that Jason is calling propositional logic, and here is why it's not. And don't get me wrong, you guys are the best at making claims and accusations. You're the masters at it. If it was a sport, if it was an Olympic sport, you have the gold. It's yours. When it comes to actually proving these claims and accusations you have, you guys suck. So you're originally mad at me because I was too confident and egotistical. Now you're mad at me because I won't take your test. The queen of self-contradictions.
by the way, the informal logic material he's talking about here, this is typically not propositional logic, because propositional logic is actually the beginnings of formal logic. So, So I said, Jason Jewell, do you mind answering the question I asked?
I said, all right, I'll tell you something. Go fuck your mother.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I do mind. I already told you I don't play this game. I was speaking to other people as well. Just because I don't answer your question in the first 20 seconds of you posting it, doesn't mean I'm trying to ignore your question. And a little side note, I was ignoring your question. Okay, this part coming up is funny. Watch.
So I said, Jason Jewell, do you mind answering the question I asked? And I put it to him again. And then he said, he's now telling us about the argument from ignorance.
And, if that's not convenient enough, you will strawman my argument and dishonestly reduce my comment to a single word.
Now telling us about the argument from ignorance.
No, Gaspar. I actually wasn't talking about the argument from ignorance. I was explaining the various characteristics that logical fallacies have in common to demonstrate the point that logic is content agnostic. So, in the action of making that point, I was providing a number of logical fallacies as examples. The argument from ignorance was one of those examples. It was not the subject matter of the comment, conversation, or debate.
And then he said, he's now telling us about the argument from ignorance.
Yeah, okay, Goofy. You guys are laughing at your own stupidity and ignorance. But don't stop on my account. For what it's worth, we're all laughing too. I was talking about the characteristics of a logical fallacy. I wasn't talking about validity. I wasn't talking about propositional logic. I wasn't talking about informal logic stuff. I was talking about the characteristics of a logical fallacy, and I was using the argument from ignorance fallacy as an example. Your problem is you don't pay attention. All you're doing is reading your own comments, explaining what you really meant, digging in deep, while skipping over the insults and sarcasm, skipping over my comments, then taking on a sarcastic and forceful tone and replacing it with blah blah blah. No, you're not immature or biased at all. You're about as immature and biased as much as Pete's a cyberstalker. Wait.
And so I said, Jason Jewell, do you mind answering the question I asked?
Oh yes, I almost forgot. I hate to burst your bubble, Gaspar. We're gonna do a really quick even-if game. Are you ready? Even if I took your little 7th grade test, and even if I got it completely wrong, even if that is what I said makes a logical fallacy, and just to make it interesting, even if I could not in any way properly explain validity to you, it would be completely irrelevant as to whether or not my definition or explanation of a logical fallacy was correct or incorrect.
And so I said, Jason Jewell, do you mind answering the question I asked? And I put it to him again. And then he said, he's now telling us about the argument from ignorance.
Tell me something. Could you order off, without help, could you order something off of the McDonald's menu? Really, all you're doing is reading something I write, making a joke, and then giggling. That's not how you go about evaluating an argument.
And the other thing is, he's kind of trying to like talk, you know, he's like, equals X is true until X is proved to be false.
So, I tell you what, since you have trouble reading words, I'm gonna help you out here. The definition of the argument from ignorance is claiming X is true until X is proven false. And your response is?
You can tell he wishes he could play with the mathematical symbols, you know, but he's not quite there yet.
Oh, look, we have another claim. I didn't see that coming. Gaspar has no idea what my education is regarding logic, propositional logic, mathematics, let alone the symbols involving any subject at all. This is an opportunity for him to just make another claim that he's not planning on proving in any way, shape, or form.
You can tell he wishes he could play with the mathematical symbols, you know, but he's not quite there yet. try to respect the fact that there is controversy.
That's why I try to respect the fact that there is controversy and not just forcefully assert things that he does.
He wishes he could play with not quite there yet.
Not quite there yet.
Here we have another one of Mr. Respectful's famous claims/insults. So, because Ghastly here is such a respectful guy, he decides to make a joke about the definition of the argument from ignorance. Now, the definition that I gave is the word-for-word definition if you were to look it up. And because the argument from ignorance uses an X to signify any claim, which is to say that any claim, every single claim you can think of, none of them are true because you can't think of a better answer. So I defined the arguments properly by using those X's, and your conclusion is, I'm trying to play with mathematical symbols and I'm not quite there yet. To what? Have fun? You can tell that I just want to play with mathematical symbols, and you know this because I defined the argument from ignorance, which happens to use two X's, and because of this, you determined that I must want to play with mathematical symbols. And furthermore, you were able to determine how much I do or do not know about mathematical symbols. How the hell would you know what mathematical symbols I am or am not familiar with based on my usage of one of them in one description? You see someone doing the dishes and all of a sudden they want to be a janitor? You see someone driving a car and all of a sudden they must want to be a cab driver? You see someone mowing their lawn and, well, he must dream of being a landscaper. Maybe we're just washing dishes, maybe we're just driving, maybe we're just mowing the lawn, and maybe we're just correctly defining a word. And you know, this is why I don't tend to favor inductive reasoning, because Pop-Tarts like you screw it up with hyperbole. So listen, I'm gonna slow this down a bit. Because you can't seem to think straight, and we all know Pete doesn't pay attention. If we're talking about logical fallacies, and I define a logical fallacy, and it happens to employ an X or two, you cannot determine what I do or do not know about math, or how much I do or do not want to play with math. Now, don't get me wrong, I know you're just making a joke, or in your case, fact, opinion, satire, but for realsies, you do understand that one definition that happens to employ two X's does not indicate my level of passion for mathematics, of which I have none. You get this, right? I mean, look, even if we don't agree on anything else, just please tell me you're not that stupid. And one more thing. This whole drive-by claim accusation thing you're doing, where you will make a claim or an assertion and then move on to another claim or assertion without even attempting to prove the previous one to be true, is ridiculous, and it's embarrassing. The biggest issue that you've addressed so far is that I was just being too confident. Aside from that, you're just making random claims and jokes. To be honest with you, the one phrase that comes to mind when I think of you is intellectually vapid. The fact that you guys have to sit there and laugh at your own jokes is just embarrassing. I'm embarrassed for you. It's kind of foolish to try to manipulate the conversation in this manner. Or at least, I mean, you better be manipulating the conversation. I refuse to believe anybody is this dumb. Trust me, it is a compliment to just assume you guys are purposely being idiots. You can tell he wants to play with mathematical symbols. You are a true, organically grown idiot. funny part is, Gaspipe, you're quite literally accusing me of being overly complex, and at the same time making fun of me for not being complex enough? As if the definition of the argument from ignorance required more than an X, and I just didn't put it there. Right? If somebody is faced with a math problem, and it's like 2 plus 3, and they figure out that it's 5, that doesn't tell you how much they love math, hate math. It doesn't tell you how bad they're at math, or how good they're at math. I mean, for Pete's sakes, Pete, this is the guy you got to help you attack me? Fire him. I do reluctantly answer their question, and the way he responds is priceless.
But anyway.
Yeah, anyways.
But anyway. And so, you know, I typically don't let people dance around questions.
Oh, you don't let people dance around your questions?
So, you know, I typically don't let people dance around questions. You know, I typically don't let people dance around questions. You know, I typically don't let people dance around questions.
Oh, make no mistake. I am breakdancing across your fucking arguments. I am pop-locking between your parentheses, dancing around your question. Look, I know that you don't pay attention, but apparently you don't read that well either, because not only is this question completely irrelevant to the discussion we were having, but I was the first one who asked a question, to which you responded with a joke, and then moved on to change the subject. Whether or not I was dancing around your question, I don't care, but you sure as hell tripped over mine. For what it's worth, you can rest easy knowing I was deliberately not answering your question. And I told you this at the time, and I explained why. Not sure if you're gonna touch on that. However, since you assert that I do not answer this question, it's not like you're gonna acknowledge my answer and then respond to it just a few minutes later, right? Because, I mean, that would be impossible if I didn't answer it, right?
I typically don't let people dance around questions, cause then you'll just never get anywhere, so.
I know, right? I could not agree more. For example, if we are discussing the argument from authority fallacy and you change the subject matter for the purpose of testing me, yeah, you won't get anywhere. You know why? Because I never let people dance around their claims.
Again, I say, so what are you going to do? Give us a buffet sampling of all the most commonly known informal fallacies and avoid the question I asked?
Yes, I am going to ignore your question, because it's completely irrelevant as to whether or not you described an appeal to a false authority fallacy correctly. Am I going to give you a buffet sampling of a number of logical fallacies? Yes. If you incorrectly describe a logical fallacy as subjective rather than objective, the proper course of action is to show why logical fallacies are objective rather than subjective.
Do you also want to give me a lengthy and overcomplicated explanation of the appeal to pity fallacy?
Okay, alright. That's good, I get it, that's funny. You are making a joke regarding my examples, but I mean, you know that's just a joke, right? You have given no evidence or rational reason as to why my examples were overly complex or irrelevant. Should I give you a complex definition of the appeal to pity fallacy? Well, you screwed up about 4 fallacies so far, so you tell me. You think it would help?
Do you also want to give me a lengthy and overcomplicated explanation of the appeal to pity fallacy?
You talk funny all the way to high school. Stuttering Stanley! Stuttering Stanley!
And so, you know, I was just kind of trying to hold his feet to the fire.
My feet to the fire. Oh, yes. Yes, you got my feet to the fire. I don't know what I'm gonna do. And this is all very serious, too. Nobody's laughing at you. You have me pitted against the fire. It's getting hot in here. What am I to do? Someone save me. Then all that stuff. All that informal logic stuff. That I do not answer this question. It's not like you're going to acknowledge my answer and then respond to it just a few minutes later, right?
And then he said, prime number. This conclusion does not entail the premises. The argument is simply invalid. Okay, so...
Yes, the definition of a prime number is to have only two distinct positive divisors, one in itself. And concerning the number 2, the only two divisors are 1 and 2. Therefore, 2 is a prime number.
And then he said, 2 is a prime number. This conclusion does not entail the premises. The argument is simply invalid.
Yes, the argument is invalid. Do you disagree with that? Were you planning on proving that I'm a fraud or a liar anytime soon? Or, I know, you're just gonna keep reasserting it over and over, and over and over and over again, and just hope it comes true. But this still doesn't have anything to do with the conversation we had about logical fallacies. It has nothing to do about the accusations that I'm a fraud or a liar or a charlatan or that I manipulate people.
And then he said, 2 is a prime number. This conclusion does not entail the premises. The argument is simply invalid. Okay, so you don't want to admit maybe the limits of his understanding.
Oh, okay. I don't want to admit maybe the limits of my understandings. Okay, that's just repeating your claim in a different way, in a different structure. I'm sorry, you can't look at someone's argument and conclude, well, maybe you don't want to admit the limits of your understandings and expect that to be an actual evaluation of this person's argument. That's not a rebuttal, it's not a reply, it's not a response, it's not an argument, it's nothing. It's the intellectual equivalent of saying, nuh-uh, you're wrong. Or, how about you just agree or disagree with me on whether or not it's valid or invalid? Or, with all due irritability, shut the fuck up.
The argument is simply invalid. Okay, so you don't want to admit the limits of his understanding. So yes, it's invalid.
Oh yeah, close one. How about we get back to the original conversation that we were having regarding logical fallacies? It's not that I'm avoiding the subject you're trying to change this into. I just don't care. My original reply to your comment was referring to the argument from authority fallacy and your misuse of it. How the hell did we get here talking about this? I know. This is what happens when someone can't back up the original claim that they made. They start dancing all the way through until they can change the subject to something else. The only difference between your dancing and mine is mine's justified. Doesn't look as bad as yours either.
Yes, it's invalid, but in logic, it always matters why. And then he said 2 is a prime number. This conclusion does not entail the premises. The argument is simply invalid. Yes, it's invalid, but in logic, it always matters why. You don't want to admit his maybe the limits of his understanding. So yes, it's invalid, but in logic, it always matters why. It's very similar to algebra. Like when an algebra teacher tells you, when you solve a problem using pure arithmetic, and you're like, I don't need all these stupid steps. I know this stuff. I know percents and stuff. I don't need to do inverse operations. The algebra teacher is going to say, you need to show your work. You need to prove that you understand the mechanical process of algebra. Well, it's similar in propositional logic, and so it's very important to tell us why it's invalid. Not just that you think it's invalid, or that it's obviously invalid, or that it's simply invalid. Or that it's deductively invalid. You gotta say, what truth table did it violate? What fallacy is it?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. In your math class, they might require you to actually show your work. Because you're a student. And they're your teacher. And this may come as a shock to you, but you're not my teacher. You're not even a teacher. I am quite literally not required to explain a damn thing to you. And if you want to go on YouTube and whine and complain because, oh, I'm not talking to you, that's fine. But if you want to accuse me of being a fraud or a manipulator, I'm afraid you're going to have to provide some evidence. You see, I either did or I did not give a reason for why it was invalid. And if I did, then you're just incorrect. And if I didn't, then you're correct.
And then he said 2 is a prime number. This conclusion does not entail the premises. The argument is simply invalid.
I see. Well, I'm sorry. No one's required to take Pete's pop quiz, or yours. You were the one that made the original claim about an appeal to an authority fallacy. You and Pete just have a really bad habit of testing people and moving the goalpost up a bit whenever they disagree with you. So I mean, simply put, you need something a little better than he wouldn't take my test. And I think we can put up a quick list right here. this is all pretty humorous. This all started because he made a claim about a logical fallacy. I responded to your claim, so I began discussing the argument from authority and why it's a fallacy. You made a few jokes, but he couldn't back up his original claim, so he changes the subject to, if you're so smart, what's wrong with this argument? Then you started testing and not letting him change the subject. He concludes, I must be ignoring him. So now we're talking about valid and invalid mathematical problems. Great. Something I have no interest in. I do clearly explain why it's invalid. You guys just have a problem paying attention, or you just have no interest in going over that. Well, at least we won't change the subject again in like 2 seconds.
You know, so
Before you move on,
Oh yeah. But hey, before you move on, you think you can do me a favor?
but I did you a big favor.
And actually prove why I'm a liar, a fraud, a manipulator, a charlatan? You know, those things that this video was supposed to be about? I mean, didn't you accuse me of lying about my career because you couldn't find specific pieces of information that you wanted?
Are you feeling sorry for yourself? Well, you should be, because you are dirt. You make me sick, you big baby.